Hi, I'm Claire Withers and I'm with Rebekah Leviston. We're both in the corporate tax and incentives team at Brodie's, and we've put together this short 5-minute tax bite about LBTT considerations for tenants and their agents in relation to break notices and other early terminations. So to start, a note about contacting Revenue Scotland during the pandemic. As with most of us, Revenue Scotland is now largely operating from home and their telephone support desk is currently closed. So if you do need to contact Revenue Scotland about LBTT, registered SETS users can send a secure message through SETS, which can be linked to a specific return. Otherwise, you can email Revenue Scotland at lbtt@revenue.scot.
So we'll begin with a quick recap of the three types of further or review return. These are the 3-year review, the assignation return, and the termination return. Standing out from the SDLT regime, this system of submitting review returns potentially gives tenants the opportunity to reclaim overpaid tax, as each return requires the recalculation of the NPV. We'll be focusing on termination returns today, which are of particular relevance to clients during the COVID-19 lockdown.
A tenant is required to submit a termination return within 30 days of a lease coming to an end for any reason. This could be natural expiry, following a period of tacit relocation, exercising a break option, irritation, or a renunciation. In relation to break notices and notices to quit, there is an inevitable delay between service of the notice and the expiry date. So when serving or receiving a notice, or when agreeing a renunciation, tenants should be reminded of their obligation to submit a termination return, and the expiry date should be diarised. We'd recommend doing this even if at the time the notice is served, a re-gear of the lease is in contemplation. If a return isn't submitted before the deadline, the tenant could be liable to substantial penalties. But more than being a compliance issue, a termination return could also generate a repayment of LBTT. So this will be particularly relevant when a lease has been terminated early by exercise of a break option or an agreed renunciation, and the rent actually paid throughout the lease is less than that which was reported in previous returns. This could be a welcome receipt of cash for struggling tenants. Repayments can be calculated using Revenue Scotland's online calculator. The effective date for the calculation will be the same as that in the initial return, and we'll discuss more about effective dates in a separate tax bite. Before the lockdown, the turnaround time for processing repayments was about a month following submission. Outstanding repayments can be monitored via the online SET system, and we found it quite helpful to send an email or secure message to Revenue Scotland following submission of the return with a copy of the revised NPV calculation and requesting anticipated turnaround times.
It's important to note that not every lease or lease return submitted will be within the further return regime. 3 key stress tests for every agent are: firstly, is the lease an LBTT lease? The lease must not be an SDLT or stamp duty lease, and we'll cover this in another tax bite another day. Secondly, has the tenant submitted a return or ought to have submitted a return from the grant of lease or subsequent variation? And thirdly, did the tenant qualify for 100% relief in the initial return? If they did, no further returns will be required. A common example of this is where the tenant is a group company of the landlord and 100% group relief was claimed on grant of the lease. If the lease does not fall within all of these 3 areas, then no termination return is required. And a quick note, SDLT and stamp duty leases do not require a termination return, meaning that no refund can be claimed. On this slide, we have set out the key documents and information an advisor will need to ask from their client when preparing a termination return. There are times when the initial LBTT return will have been misplaced. In these circumstances, Revenue Scotland will send out a copy of the original LBTT return to the tenant's address if you quote the RS reference number over the phone, by email, or through SET secure messaging. Well, that's it from us. We hope you have enjoyed this quick tax bite. Please feel free to reach out to Claire or myself with any queries. And as always, stay safe.